Hi friends, I'm Rohit, advisor to Data Neuron. Welcome to People Plus GenAI, a human-first podcast exploring how organizations adopt GenAI, the tech, the trust, and the team changes that turn models into business impact. We focus on practical lessons, honest failures, and repeatable playbooks. A quick introduction to Data Neuron. Data Neuron is a venture-backed startup. It's reshaping enterprise AI with its LLM Studio, a no-code platform that utilizes proprietary techniques like DSeal to automate the entire LLM process, including RAG, data curation, fine-tuning, model distillation, inferencing, agent orchestration, LLM evaluation, version control, and ensuring high accuracy and efficiency. Before we start, we've got a listener gift for you, so congratulations. When you create an account on Data Neuron's standard free sandbox, you'll get a $5 credit. And if you email saying you watched this podcast, Data Neuron will add an extra $5 as a thank you token to your account. This offer ends December 2025. So let's jump into our conversation. Today, I'm joined by Tapti Bandyopadhyay, a dear friend, an ex-colleague from Wipro. She's now advising multiple companies with nearly 3 decades of AI and ML experience. Tapti has been a steady voice across industry transitions. Welcome, Tapti. Great to have you here.
Pleasure.
So let's straight away dive into the Q&A, and I'll start with an anecdote, which I always try and do. So Global Bank used to run thousands of, as we call, brittle rules to flag fraud, creating a massive number of false positives. Over time, they moved to ML scoring, fewer false alarms, and now they run agentic assistants that combine signals, documents, and human review to make decisions. So, Tapti, the first question to you. You've been watching AI evolve for over 30 years now, from rules to statistical models to deep learning and now agentic systems. How would you frame this curve, and what's your high level take on how decision making has truly shifted?
Yeah, so we jumped into the deepest recesses of AI first. Um, the bank example actually is very apt because financial services clients, as we have seen, Rohit, they have been quite quick in adopting AI and machine learning, especially on structured data, because their business requires them to kind of hold high quality data for quite a number of years. So essentially, training, that is the most critical step in developing an AI model. So essentially, training data availability in terms of both quality and quantity has been a relatively easy scenario for the BFSI clients, right? So the example that you spoke about, for instance, the fraud and anomaly detection, essentially, that's the use case we talk about. So, for instance, in US, we know that the fraud data consolidation kind of an effort happened when four of the largest US banks, I think JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and Capital One, I think they came together and created a repository of all the fraud related and anomaly related intelligence that they gathered over the years. And that became kind of a pattern base for them to leverage from each other's experience in terms of how they detected and predicted fraudulent activities or attacks before it happened. It's very critical for BFSI institutions, especially to be able to predict and preempt. uh, any attempt to fraud, rather than doing anything post facto, right? So from that perspective, they actually kind of learned from each other, collected their data, and that actually helped everybody in terms of uh, like training their ML models for as exhaustively as possible for detecting and predicting fraudulent, unusual anomaly behavior from you know uh, maleficent actors, or even unintended consequences of misusing certain services. So essentially, that brings us to the main problem of AI that still holds good, which is availability of quality data, right? That's the starting point for all the AI assets that we have built so far. Uh, so essentially, availability of quality data, model base, fraud patterns in this particular example scenario. So those are the kind of things that are the first level of requirement for any client, any company to be successful in their AI adoption in the first place.
So well said, Tapti. I think we've seen BFSI taking an absolute lead as far as leading technology, especially AI, ML, and now Gen AI. And the volume of
Yes.
data, the variety of data, the veracity of data, and everything they're absolutely leading. So, and a very good example where actually competing banks, have got together and in some sense been sharing data for
Yes,
the
exactly.
betterment of their customers and society at large. So I think that's a great example of how BFSI is leading the way for the rest of the industry segment. So a great start, and that moves on to the next question where people are continuously talking about the enterprise GPT, the new
Mhm.
phrase which has been coined some time back. So, an e-commerce in India, closer to us here, and they had branches worldwide. They fine-tuned a closed model and a huge number of database, a huge number of resolved tickets. They were able to manage both structured and unstructured through data neuron. And they were able to cut the
Mhm.
resolution time also significantly. So this is one example where companies have gone in the direction of building what they call an enterprise GPT for their company, very, very customized. But in your view, how do you specifically pick up, a company-wide versus a department-wide versus a personal data versus an end user data? How do you differentiate and what should you, take as a direction? And how do you move from a pilot going down to the minutest level of an individual user whom we can satisfy his or her needs? Your views, please.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where, in fact, I literally stay away from the clutter and the din and bustle of general developer GPTs and like chat GPTs and all sorts of models and benchmarks that are coming through, because enterprises do not care about which model can crack GRE. Enterprise doesn't write GRE. So essentially, those are certain benchmarks and use cases which are good for playing games. Of course, we all know that AI started from playing games in terms of Jeopardy and then chess and whatnot. But when it comes to enterprise, making it personalized is the most important aspect of adoption again. So, from the input side, of course, as we were talking about the quality of data and the exhaustivity of data, from the consumption side in an enterprise, it is personalization of experience, right? So, you remember we actually created an architecture of sorts, which is something that, as I can understand, data neuron also plays at, where we spoke about chip to experience to outcomes, right? So starting from the GPUs or TPUs, or now we are talking about QPUs, the quantum processing units, from that level of chip hardware to the AI services, to the models, to the algorithms, to the data curation layers, and then the transformers, the language models, or the multimodal models, where visual language models also play a role. And then you actually enable the end user, the individual person's experience, right? So that's where again we spoke about persona-based experience design for AI use cases, right? And the agentic layer is what actually makes it possible. So just like in manufacturing, we had this concept of digital twin. Agentic AI has actually made the concept of digital twin possible for every piece of service that comes out of every enterprise, right? So, be it customer service, be it in healthcare, uh, agents are actually working side by side with their human owners, per se, the human controllers, and delivering the services at a much higher speed, much higher accuracy, hence, the quality of service also improves, and of course the cost goes down because you are utilizing the expensive human resources to do much more with less, right? So the example that you gave, for instance, right, the number of tickets that can now be managed by agents instead of utilizing human agents hours every time. So that has actually brought down the uh, turnaround time for ticket resolutions significantly, but it has also brought down the cost, right? So essentially, the experience to outcomes layer is this is where it actually falls in. So because the experience also has improved here, and it has actually improved the productivity of the frontline service delivery human agents, and it has improved the quality of service, and it has reduced the cost by improving the productivity in a very non-linear manner. You would remember with a similar use case that we developed for one of the largest banks here in US, that was EKYC, and we actually kind of brought down, I think, before the EKYC uh, automation, so to say, AIification of EKYC, the user groups used to take about, they could resolve, I think, as I remember, per person, they could resolve only 3 KYC processes every day per FTE. Whereas when we put this solution in, the cycle time brought it down to 20 minutes only. And now with agentic, those 20 minutes will now would have come down to seconds, right? So essentially, just imagine the amount of productivity that those teams would have gotten. And then the teams wouldn't have just been doing only KYC kind of transactional processing, but more value adding processing, kind of like customer relationship or cross selling, upselling of the banking products. Those are the kind of new revenue opportunities as business outcomes that these folks are able to generate. So revenue per employee, for instance, I think is a very critical strategic metric that most of the strategic AI use cases should track eventually. And that's where the chip to experience to outcomes, because many times we just stop at that individual personalized experience. But as we spoke about in the enterprise context, experience is great, but then what does that experience translate to? If it doesn't generate dollars in the top line, or if it doesn't reduce costs in the bottom line, just getting wonderful experience at the same price, at the same business parameter, at the same cost doesn't really make sense for the enterprise, right? So productivity without outcome, it becomes that kind of paradox. So essentially, that's where we speak about more revenue impact, more profitability impact, more operating margin impact kind of outcomes to be related to the experiences of customers, to the experiences of employees, to the experiences of channel partners, distributors. Anybody in the system should be able to get very differentiated experiences and should be able to translate that experience into hard dollar value. So that's what I think AI is enabling, but it's up to us in terms of essentially how much we can capture the value that AI generates directly and indirectly, the tangibles and the intangibles, in terms of what we are able to measure, what we are able to monitor and report.
Well said, Tapti. I think the example that you gave of eKYC, which I think got implemented more than 6 years back, was way ahead of its time
Yes,
before AI actually came into this avatar and this limelight which it is under. But on a lighter note, you talked about revenue per employee and building digital twins. Earlier, agentic AI and digital twins were all for people if we call them, in the bottom of the pyramid in terms of improving their productivity. But now we have bots which are actually digital twins of CEOs. So not that the
yes.
time has come to move them out and bring in just the avatar, but actually improve his or her performance also. So we've seen that agentic AI curve also mature, going to the top of the ladder or top of the pyramid also. But I really like your encapsulation of chip to experience to outcomes. I think that's a great way to, position AI. And thanks for jogging my memory on this. So, with this, we'll just move on to the third question. And there is a big debate on what we call independence or model agnostic. Just a few days back, I saw this very beautiful chart where an analyst had ranked, the top AI models across the globe. So the usual suspects in terms of Claude and ChatGPT and Perplexity and Grok, all the big names were actually there. Some are open source, some are proprietary. And with every update, there is a new functionality, new security, new, patch which is available. But the challenge for the enterprises is that how do you keep your stack future proof, especially when the foundation itself keeps evolving? In your view, how should a company become an independent provider of its own intelligence and not just get tied down to one underlying model or method?
Yeah, so essentially model lock-in, those kind of situations we need to avoid as much as possible. So two, three ways of probably trying it in terms of strategy. So one is essentially model ops, where we need to continuously scan the environment in terms of the technology or algorithmic supply chain and look at the models that are coming out every day. So that's like as you know, Rohit, I keep reading all the archive research papers that come out on a daily basis these days, and there are new kind of techniques that are coming out every day almost. So keeping your models tied to just one foundational system doesn't really make any sense. Having said that, foundational models, they have their own utility, right? They are actually kind of commodities or utilities these days. And I literally don't understand in an enterprise context again why these benchmarks that are again, the generic benchmarks, so to say, they don't really matter in an enterprise context because to each its own, right? So just the way, say, Bloomberg GPT had been very popular and a lot of because Bloomberg has its own database, has its own knowledge base or intelligence base, so to say. So essentially, they will have their own model, which is much beyond just RAG, much beyond just normal fine tuning, and they will have an exhaustivity of their own way of writing, their own kind of language, the language of business. So that's something that each enterprise needs to develop at a very fundamental level. For instance, if you look at CLV, customer, I keep going back to the banking and financial services examples because that's where we see the most of implementations, and that's where they started early. So essentially, we can learn from them a lot. So if we look at CLV, for instance, how banks or insurance companies measure the customer lifetime value, right? So even that might differ by the strategy of that particular bank or insurance company, right? Say what defines high net worth customers, high net worth individuals in a particular bank's context that is suppose more focused towards wealth management, investment banking vis-a-vis normal retail transaction banking. So in those two different contexts, the definition of customer lifetime value will be very different because the numbers that you will use, the annual margins by customer accounts, the size of customers asset under management, AUMs, all those things will vary, right? So essentially those things are not available to the foundational models, and they shouldn't be from a data governance point of view. So what the foundational models should ideally be used in, and doesn't really matter in terms of like, so long as it hallucinates less, it generates less garbage, uh, we should pick those things up. For instance, Anthropic Claude is a good example. They are focused on enterprise usage, but then having the foundational model as kind of a fabric underneath, you have to build those company specific definitions, the lexicons, the ontologies, what customer lifetime value, for instance, means to that particular bank, that particular insurance company. Those are the kind of contexts that you engineer on top of the foundational models, right? That is how in fact these enterprise adoption of transformers or agentic, whatever solutions we talk about. I mean, we gave an example of the LLMs at one layer. Same thing goes for agentic solution development and multi-agent communication protocols. Do you use MCP or A2A or whatever? Doesn't really matter so long as it's able to generate. And we are looking at hybrid kind of architectures, right? So there can be multiple models depending on multiple use cases require different kinds of models. In some cases, you require speed of response. For instance, if you are developing a customer service conversational AI interface, speed of response matters a lot, right? In some places, the accuracy, even at a loss of speed, becomes your priority. For instance, in the previous use case that we were talking about, anomaly or fraud detection, in that case, speed is not so important as the quality of insights that are coming. They are much more important, right? Speed is important when you are preempting, essentially, but given that you are capturing data continuously, you will have a pipeline and you will have a kind of a sliding window to go through it. So the accuracy becomes more important than speed in that particular use case context. So different use cases require different kinds of foundational models in terms of what each one of them is good at. And then anyways, on top of it, you have to set your context, you have to develop your own language models, visual models, pattern basis, pre-trained models. And then on top of that, you talk about post-inferencing, post-training kind of reasoning models that are foundational again for agentic. So at every level, there needs to be a hybrid approach and best of breed kind of a thing, whatever works for a particular use case within an enterprise. And then the enterprise has to kind of contextualize it with its own knowledge base, its own intelligence base, its own pattern base. And that's how, in fact, the model fits to the enterprise. And the lock-in can be avoided essentially by using this hybrid approach because there are multiple models and when you can switch models through model ops. It is an expensive process to switch models, but if need arises, like there are data sovereignty issues that come up, or some legal issues of, say, language copyright violation, those kind of things come up, of course, you don't have a choice but switch. So those options need to exist in terms of the architecture.
Very interesting observation. Traditionally, we used to see all the technology experimentation, including automation and AI, used to be the department of the CIO or the CTO. But now, because it's
Mm,
become so widespread, and you talked about customer lifetime value, we're seeing finance, HR, strategy, operations, everyone getting together as an organization to see how the tons and tons of data that they have and the knowledge bases that they have are fed into this, and ultimately the organization is successful. So, in some sense, everyone's become a quasi technologist, whether it's HR, finance, or operation, where they're actually
yeah.
helping them define what these organization KPIs can be, not just, the technology stack evaluation that normally the centers of excellence will do. So, this brings me to a very interesting aspect of people. So, shifting gears, most of the top 10 uh, tech companies are looking at optimizing their number of people. So, we've seen it with Microsoft, Salesforce, Meta, Workday, you name them, everyone is looking at either phasing out people or doing an absolute, stark reduction in terms of the headcount itself. So, if you are advising a leadership team, what kind of practical people aspects would you talk about in terms of reskilling, redeployment, and so that they can preserve that human capital that they've built over a long period of time and have them complemented along with technology?
Yeah, this is the most critical question, right? So the whole world has been talking about Amazon uh, getting rid of 14,000 or 30,000. The number is not very clear as of now, but getting rid of those many thousands of employees. And we keep hearing, especially in the software engineer space, the SWE jobs, the entry level jobs for our children, for instance, are getting squeezed every year or every month, so to say. So there are, in fact, pros and cons of it, right? So if we look at the functional departments within an organization, say, let's take the example of Amazon, right? So a lot of, for instance, HR, finance, even sales and marketing kind of uh, functions can actually improve their productivity drastically by using agentic AI, for instance, right? So in such situations, the lure of productivity and cost savings is right there in front of every company. And of course, every company has the right of serving their shareholders, and they will always look at cost control. Nobody is there as an NGO, right? So essentially, they will try to improve their profit margins. If they're investing so much in AI, they might as well look for some returns. But there are certain things that can be done instead of losing out. Like there are pros and cons of everything, right? So essentially, if you are not taking fresh brains from the market right now at the entry levels, especially for software engineering or ML engineering kind of things, you are basically missing out on the latest, because these are the crowd that are, I call them, not just digital native, they are machine native, right? So they are just very comfortable working with machines, working by the machines, and working for the machines in some cases, right? So machines are actually sometimes becoming customers, machines are becoming the recommenders. So machines are actually now doing a lot of things that earlier human agents were supposed to do. And these are the entry level, the fresh graduates, for instance, out of the colleges right now, over the last 1 or 2 years, are the ones that actually take that way of working, the hybrid mode of working, man plus machine mode of working, as their default expectation from a workplace, right? So if you actually, rather than not taking the fresh brains, if you can actually create some kind of a churn model within your organization where the fresh brains come in, and then there is a natural filtration process in terms of revenue per employee. I keep harping on that revenue per employee because I have I have learned a lot in my 7 8 years in Gartner. And Gartner, revenue per employee, especially in the team that I was part of in the end user research, core research, the US core team, that was fabulous. Like we were just, I think we were about 350 people across the levels from principal to directors to VPs. And we were generating almost 1.5 billion US dollars of research revenue for Gartner. So that revenue per employee kind of a metric. And when you look at that, essentially, if employees are generating that much revenue, essentially they are bringing to you something that is of great value, right? Because indirectly the customers are paying for that revenue. So in such situations, employees that are generating that kind of revenue, you take good care of them, you try to retain them, you give the kind of rewards and recognition R&R policies with your HR within that organization, where the highest revenue per employee, that quadrant people, they feel like staying within the organization. Because what happens is the moment you start churning people out, the first to go are the smartest ones because they get the offers, right? In the market, there is always the demand for the smartest ones. So that's the reason. In fact, I think HR needs to play a very creative role there, much beyond just bell curve management, and look at creating very strong propositions to measure, first of all, the revenue per employee and give those KPIs to each individual, no matter which part of the organization you are. If a person is given a purpose in terms of, like, that person is able to see that this is the impact that I am generating onto my company's top line, or I'm saving this much cost for my company in the bottom line, so then that gives this employee a purpose to do better, right? So that's what I would say is probably the most doable and kind of quantifiable measure to handle this talent challenge within these companies.
Thanks a lot, Tapti. That was practical and, you know, very well thought through, answers. Brings us to the end of our conversation, very engaging. I want to, of course, remind our friends who are listening in about the gift that I talked about earlier. But thank you very much, Tapti, for this conversation. Thanks to our listeners. And if you're an advisor or top voice or want to join the conversation, let's connect over LinkedIn. See you till next time. Thanks a lot, Tapti. Wish you all the best. Talk to you soon.
Entirely my pleasure. Thank you.